Hi, I'm Dave Sherwood, the CEO of Bibliu. I'm here to introduce you to Campus Convos, the podcast where we discuss all things tech and education. Hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe on wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please give a share to others interested in the space.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Campus Convos. Joining me this week to talk about how to secure major college funding is Dan Kinney, president of Iowa Western Community College. He is an absolute rock star in the community college scene and has been really helpful in not only helping us build our product and service offering out, but also we've traveled together to a number of conferences, including the AFIT conference in Phoenix this year. So it's been great to be out on the road with Dan and talk to other community colleges about their experience and have him share his experience. But yeah, today the focus is all about funding, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do in any sector. And Dan and I were sitting down in Phoenix, as I said, at the AFIT conference. And Dan was telling me about his latest fundraising drive, which I think, Dan, you said was $60 million drive that you were doing.
$55 million, what we're looking at.
Yeah. And over your course as president, I assume that's just one of a number of fundraising drives you've done. So maybe you could give us a little bit of color about your background, the college background, and the fundraising that you've been able to achieve, which is frankly remarkable. I've fundraised less than you, and many bigger tech companies than us have fundraised less, which I think says all you need to say. But we're interested to hear more about your experience, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks for having me on. It's part of my life anymore. I'll tell you, I think I've been a college president now for 16 years, and continuing to have the fundraising. How do we continue to gain funds to run our institutions has been instrumentally difficult, especially with taxes and the way we are in the United States, and a lot of our funding comes through taxes, but we're starting to see that decline, in regards to the way the government wants to do different things. So we have to find other avenues. And one has really been the fundraising, and that's mainly for facilities and different things like that. But, in 16 years, I've had to run a lot of different fundraising opportunities, not only for facilities, but how do we keep the cost of education down for our students? And that's scholarship dollars. And we're seeing more and more people coming forward, really trying to help the students in an affordable education. I look at back 30 years ago, really even 15, 16 years ago when I started being a president. Unfortunately, our cost of education was less, and we never kept up with inflation. And now we've kind of surpassed that. I mean, number one debt in America right now is student loan debt. And trying to put that on the back of the students continues to be an issue for higher education. And how do you resolve that? Well, number one is if we can raise money out there to help support some of our operations, facilities, to get high-tech, high-demand job, we have to have high-tech facilities. So to be able to build those facilities, but at the same time, how do we keep it cost-effective for the students, that we don't outprice them where they're not going to come and get that education, to get that good-paying job and fill those positions that employers day-to-day are just beating down our door saying, I need more of. So that's kind of more of my background. I've been more probably student services, is working with student success. How do we get them from start to finish through my career? I started off as a missions counselor years ago and have worked my way through. And now for the last 16 years, I've been, or going on my 16th year as a college president. So excited for the future of education, but also concerned about the future of education in America.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting point you raise about debt being the number one cost and liability that most people have. Not many people know outside of the sector, or perhaps those that actually have loans themselves, student loans, that actually if you go bankrupt, that doesn't, the loan still stays in place after the bankruptcy. It's one of the only types of debt that is true of. Obviously, if you have a business and that fails, or you have a house with a mortgage and you can't repay it, generally when you go bankrupt, there's a clean slate, which is, there's complexities with that, your credit rating and all these kind of things. It's not a simple process. But to have debt, and I'm not aware of any elsewhere in the world actually, to have debt that follows you through a bankruptcy is, it's significant. And tell us a bit about, obviously a key focus has been the cost of education and scholarship. Tell us a bit about the the fundraising you've done at Iowa Western, how much have you done over the years? What does a campaign typically look like? Or maybe give us an example of a recent campaign.
Well, normally campaigns are probably a little bit smaller, and I've only been the president here at Iowa Western. I'm going on, my 4th year. And the first major one that we have right now has been looking at, we're trying to build a new diesel tech program. Well, not really a new diesel, a building to support our diesel tech program. We probably over in the last, I'd say 10 years ago, we were probably 70% of our students were arts and sciences, coming here, getting some gen eds out of the way, and then transferring to the university. Right now, we're about 50-50. And I'll be into the future, I think we're going to be probably 70% CTE, that career technical education, where they're going to come in, get a skill set, and go to the workforce. And 30% will be transferring on. So you really see the transformation of what the community college system is doing in America is putting more students out to there. Well, I look at our current diesel tech lab. It was built back in probably the 70s and 80s, housing 50 students. Well, we're running 70 students through there right now and turning students away in that. Same in the auto area and things like that. But it's no different than construction, welding, HVAC, robotics, some of those new programs we've had to start in the last few years to support the needs of the jobs and the communities that we serve. So by putting this one in, we'll be able to have an opportunity to increase, pretty much double our transportation center, which will include our automotive and diesel tech. But then we'll be able to take those spaces and renovate them, and we'll turn those into bigger construction labs, HVAC labs, welding labs, and things like that. So we got to continue to grow. Our campus was built, again, 70%. 10 years ago, we're in arts and sciences. I just needed classrooms. Now I need lab space. So that's the one major one that we've done since I've been here. Now, in the past, what have I done? Different things. A lot of them have been facilities, but a lot of them scholarships. And most of those are anywhere from $4 to $5 million to the biggest one I've done prior to this date was 18 million. And that was to upgrade some labs at another campus or at a college and to increase CTE because that's where the need's at. We don't get facility funds in the state of Iowa. Now, every community college system in every state's funded a little bit differently. And we don't get funds in the state of Iowa for facilities. So those are either getting a voter approved taxes to increase the taxes to build those facilities or complete fundraising. And majority of times what we try to do is kind of balance those. We do a little bit of fundraising, but we also go back to the voters. And the voters normally approve a lot of those type of bonds because they see the needs for HVAC, or welding or construction or diesel tech and stuff like that. If you look at, and kind of the push that we've had on the diesel tech is we're going to see movement of product, transportation. We're going to see a study recently done, 1,000% increase in the state of Nebraska, which I'm kind of on the border of Nebraska and Iowa. And we're going to see about a 900% increase in the state of Iowa. That's getting goods out or even goods into our service area. So that's where we see that need. But, this past spring, unfortunately, we had a major weather disaster around our region where we had I think we had about 16 tornadoes in one day. Construction, HVAC, the needs for that. Our communities see and our citizens see the needs for those skill sets in our area. So when we go out and ask them to approve a $30 or $40 million bond, normally they're pretty good at saying, yeah, we're going to do that because we see the needs or we see the skill sets are needed in these areas. So, but then a lot of what I've done is, how do we continue to grow to keep it accessible or keep education accessible to students? How do we lower the cost without putting it on the backs of the students? Well, majority of those have been small, $5 to $10 million type campaigns to help increase our scholarship areas to help improve those type of services for our students.
Yeah, really interesting. And also, Dan, to your point on, affordability of education and, what the kind of purpose of education is, clearly having like CTE programs where you leave with a skill, perhaps you've already got a job or you're very close to getting a job. It seems like the future is more in skill-based learning and a bit less in general. I mean, I did a general chemistry degree, and frankly, it's not very useful ever in my career. A small portion of those graduates do chemistry teaching, or they work in a lab, but you're not really leaving with hard skills. Even the teachers and lab workers had to actually learn on the job skills. So interesting to see CTEs growing. And in the big campaign you've been running at the moment, the $60 million campaign. If I was a new college president, perhaps like yourself a couple of years ago, how, like, if I wanted to run a campaign for, I don't know, $10-20 million, and we're going to look at some scholarships, maybe a bit of capital investment in a new lab building for auto or something like this, how should I go about the fundraising process? Like, who do I talk to? How do I set a reasonable goal? How do I ensure it happens in a reasonable time frame? And as president, what's my role versus what should I get my team to do to help me? Like, help me out if I was a president that just hadn't done any of these things before.
Well, I think the first thing is you got to have data. I mean, if you can show people data, and we use what I call Lightcast here, is what's the employment, what's happening in employment in our region, and putting some of that together. What are we going to see into the future? So having that data, I mean, you can't go out and say, hey, will you give me $1 million? Because the person's going to come back and say, well, why? Well, if I don't have data to show them, so it's really getting that data. So I really lean on my institutional research department and academic department. Say, okay, let's start looking at this. Let's skim through this data and get some really good key talking points and put them in handouts. You can go in and talk to somebody. It's going to resonate, but they're going to think. They're going to keep thinking about it, and they can always refer back to that. So I think the number one is having that type of data to support why you're fundraising. If it's to help, put more kids into the healthcare world, the needs for nurses and things like that. We see the increase or the retirements. I mean, really in my area and sector I'm in right now is we're seeing a large retirement of healthcare workers. Well, we still have an aging population. We're not going to change. That's not going to change anytime soon. So how do you put them into there? Well, so having that kind of data, hey, here's the retirements we're seeing in the future. This is the pipeline we're having going in right now. We've got to push more students to that pipeline. That's how do we do that? Well, one is it's funding. How do you get students engaged into that? So putting that data together. Then really identifying some of your key partners. I think one thing that I've seen in my time in higher education, and definitely in the last 16 years, is individuals and more corporations and businesses are giving back into education more than they ever have. Being able to go out to the business, to the local hospitals and foundations and things like that. So you've got to identify who are those key people that you need to go in and talk with that are at foundations or at corporations to say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do to support the growth or your job, your employment, the people that you need. And here's what I need to get that moving forward. That sometimes comes in cash. Sometimes it comes into equipment, new equipment that's coming in. I always say I want to stay on the cutting edge, yet not the bleeding edge. I don't want to be so far ahead of what's happening out there in the workforce that we're training too far ahead, but we've got to keep up to date. I look at auto. I mean, if I've got a bunch of 1970s and 80s and even 90s now cars in my shop that our kids are working on, today's cars are so much different. So you got to keep into that. So it's really identifying ahead of time prior to going in for the ask, what they do, what are key points that are going to really touch them to give back to your institution. So I think those are the keys. I mean, my staff does great research. They provide the data that I need. They put the flyers together to go out there. Then honestly, a lot of it's me going out there, but not just me. Take students with you, take staff with you, the faculty who see it day to day. I look at, unfortunately as a college president, I'm looking at the institution at the 30,000 level. I'm not on ground level every day because I have to see what's happening throughout the institution itself. So those are key. And having that good staff. I mean, I look at my foundation vice president. She does an amazing job, my CFO, and then to my faculty. What do you need? And getting them involved into that. But so it's really getting that data, then identifying who are key partners that want to give back. And then as we move forward is working with them and making sure we're seeing the buzzes they need, talking about equipment. Maybe it's going into a business and getting equipment to fill that lab that I'm asking for, because, part of that 55 million into there isn't just building itself, it's equipment up to date, the new technologies and things like that. So every funder or every individual that gives to the institution has something a little bit different to offer in finding those individuals and identifying them.
Very similar story, fundraising for a tech company, where it's all about, can you be clear about your value propositions, what you're doing? Obviously, in your case, it's talking about how they're adding back to the community, how they're helping the community, perhaps the community specifically in the industry that they worked in, or kids from the same neighborhood that they grew up in, or something like this. But for the tech company, it's a similar concept, like how are we actually making a difference to the student, the university, and what's the economic benefit that we create, and then obviously what's the financial benefit for the investor. So a very similar story, and like the number one advice I would give other tech entrepreneurs as well is like, make sure that deck, that presentation, that flyer is really crystal clear about the data and the benefit. And then in terms of the next phase, which is like getting out there, like how do you get in front of people? Obviously, you got this big list of alumni, which is a starting place. You got previous donors as well. But like, how do you get out there? How do you meet people in the community? And I imagine some of the people you're meeting haven't necessarily donated to Iowa Western before. Maybe they didn't even study there. I think we talked about an individual, maybe a billionaire, I can't remember exactly, but I think his wife had a connection to the college or the area. Like how are you getting out there to potential donors?
Well, first of all, you really work with your current supporters, and you go out and talk to them. And recent happenings, went into a foundation, local family foundation here, was kind of selling our story. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're trying to do. How it tied to them, and they said, "Hey, there's this other foundation that's out there. They're on similar deals." Foundation I didn't even know about. I mean, honestly, I had no clue about it. And so they helped me make that connection. So a lot of times is your current supporters help to connect you to future supporters and continue to build that connection. It is. I think one of the, I mean, I hate to say it. I think as a college president, it's at public relations, being out there, listening to people's story, meeting them at meetings that I'm at, or board meetings that I'm at, that boards that I serve on in the communities or events there, and finding out and kind of hearing where they're at, what their needs are. Maybe they attended a community college. That's a big one. And be able to make those connections, getting those contacts, and then following up with them. And a lot of it, just to do a cold call into a foundation is very difficult. If you haven't dealt with them before, not understanding them, but getting that ahead of time. It's the events in the evenings that I attend and different things like that. It's not just sitting in my office, going home at night and then coming back to my office. It's going to events, meeting people, having other people introduce you, such as the one foundation that said, "Hey, this foundation's out there." And honestly, have you heard about them? I said, "No, I really haven't." They said, "Well, we'll do a introduction to you." So I got back, and by the time I left, that foundation got back here. They had emailed the executive director of the other one, introduced me, kind of what I'm doing, what they've done in the past with us. And then I took it from there, and we've been working with them quite a bit. And it's been very positive. So a lot of sometimes it's who do you know and how can they help you move forward? So those are big deals that are out there that really help, I think, college presidents or institutions kind of move forward in finding what can we do? I mean, how can I help you? I know them, they'll tie to you and stuff like that.
That makes sense. And again, very similar in the tech world. So much of investment raising is done through networking. And one of the best ways to do that is through introductions, whether that be a previous donor, a prospective donor, like you were saying. In our case, we're talking about investors. And what about, are there sort of, I don't know, clubs or groups that you can go to meet these kind of people? Like with tech investors, there's angel networks, which are really good. They host events and you can go and present, or even just join them for drinks and meet some people. There's various sort of like founder clubs you can go to. I must say, I've always found kind of like indirect approach to building a network pretty ineffective, because you'll never know. You meet a lot of random people in an evening and won't necessarily have any directly connected. I've always found like, oh, we're quite keen to meet these 3 investors. Let's do some research on them, find out who they've invested in or where they are, and let's go and get a direct introduction if we can. It seems a better way. But are there any sort of clubs or groups that you can go to meet these people?
I think the important thing as a college president is to get on boards locally. I sit on our chamber board. I sit on, well, not only Council Bluffs,
Yes.
but Omaha. So I have a river. I'm along 2 state lines. So I do as much in Nebraska as I do in Iowa too. So I sit on the Omaha chamber. I sit on the Council Bluffs chamber. I sit on our local economic development board. I sit on one of the major hospital boards that Methodist hospital boards that are basically serve Council Bluffs or Southwest Iowa and Omaha. So being involved with those and getting onto those, I think are very important. One is just public relations for your institution. It's amazing how many people don't know about you. I sometimes we kind of laugh around here. Sometimes we're the best kept secret in Southwest Iowa. People haven't been on our campus, don't know what we do and things like that. So it's that public relations. Sometimes I kind of kid when I'm an overpaid public relations director. I really am. I've got to be out there. I'm the front of the institution. I serve a 9-member board who's out there too, but I'm the face of the institution in hitting those. So not only do I do that in Council Bluffs, but I've served 9 counties. I do it down in Clarinda and is on our south side, up clear out on our east side and even up north. So being involved in those types and really encouraging employees to be out there, because sometimes employees come forward and say, hey, have we talked to X, Y, and Z? I'm like, no, didn't know about it. Because sometimes we don't even know about it that's out there. The other day, one of my board members here locally, went up and talked with a foundation. It's a local family foundation. So we went up and kind of just gave them a spill of here what we're doing and found out we have some similarities. Now, there's another contact I have as I continue to fundraise. I didn't go in with a hard sell. I want this right away. I went in more of that friendship type deal, kind of building a relationship with them, letting them know what we do, wanting to know what do you want to see your foundation do? Where are you putting your money in your foundation? So then I come back and now I can put a plan together to go back and hit that foundation at another date when I'm needing some money. Some of it is going to be part of this fundraising effort that I'm currently involved with.
I hadn't really thought of being part of the local chambers and the economic development groups and this kind of thing. Areas where you'll meet successful business people local to the area, businesses that are hiring your graduates as well. So that's definitely something I think a new president should take in mind. I think your point on being the PR director is a really good one. I think any president or CEO, essentially our role is to be the figurehead of the organization. We're not there to do the work itself, but we're there to communicate the strategy and, engage, whether it's a donor or the student or the faculty, whoever it is, engage them and get them excited by what we're trying to do. And I think there are a lot of leaders out there that just don't get out enough. They're too focused on doing and operating, and just being members of various chambers, for instance, is a great way to help them then run a campaign to drive fundraising, or potentially help them, build some CTE programs around local employers and this kind of thing. And so in terms of like the planning and the timing, how long does it typically take? So this $60 million campaign, how long does it take from like you announcing it formally or informally to your board through to, finishing it? Is there like an open kind of window where donations kind of roll in? Is there anything you can do to predict where it's going to land?
The initial phase of it is usually about 6 months at the most. Because you've got to get a concept, you've got to have building costs. I can't go out and say, well, I'm going to build this building and I think it's going to cost me this. So it takes some upfront. And while you're doing that, that's when you're starting to identify some areas, donors, and things like that. As you're working with architects to get that exact cost down. I'll be honest, Originally we say it's 55 million. It is 53,267,000. I mean, I've got it down to the science now of where we're at, because we're about 30% knowing what our exact costs are, working through that system. So that's where that starts. Now, on the fundraising side, usually set a goal. You want to be done by a certain date. And usually that large is a couple of years. A $5 million fundraising to build scholarships for nursing students, that may be 6 months, maybe a year at most. The smaller amounts, the larger amounts are a little bit different. And this is the largest I've ever had to try to work with, or largest amount I've ever fundraised with. So when it comes to it, so it's going to take us a little while. We are just boards approved us moving forward. We've started doing some of the initial contacts. It's going to be 2 years. When it comes to it, that's where I've got kind of a 24-month window is what I put in for the fundraising aspect of it. Now, I did ahead of that, as we were going through, not knowing exactly where the costs were. We had a pretty good estimate where it was. That's when I started doing my initials. Hey, this is what I'm trying to do. We're working on some final numbers. Is your foundation or are you as a person interested in it? So we've laid some of that groundwork. Now, waited through the holidays. Now we're off to the big fundraising portion of it, and we'll hit some of those. We'll find our first key, and through that process, I really kind of try to identify who may be our kind of lead gift. You always want kind of a lead gift, your larger donor. We've identified them, and in fact, next week I'll be out to speak with them a little bit of where, next steps kind of moving forward. So it's left up to an individual or institution, I should say, not really an individual, but the institution is how long do you want to take and stuff like that. The problem is sometimes you need it yesterday. So you got to move a little bit faster. Sometimes you got some time. You're looking a little bit further into the future. So you've got some time to kind of work that. This one is a little bit quicker. I mean, it's looking into the future, but some of it I need yesterday. So as we move forward, so the timeline itself kind of left up. And what does your area look like? I mean, nice thing is I'm in a large metro area. If I was in a smaller rural communities, it's going to take a little bit longer to get to that. Here, I've got some donors that probably got a little bit more money that I can hit to raise those funds a little bit quicker. So it's timing's everything, not going to lie, but it is usually difficult to figure out exactly what's the right timeline you have.
And in terms of predicting where it's going to land, do you have I'm thinking on the sales side, we actually don't do, on the investment side, we don't have a super sophisticated approach to pipeline tracking, but we'll have a list of all the people we're speaking to, and we'll rank them into they've met with me, they've met with the management team, they've seen the data. We think they're reviewing the contract. So we try and say, well, these group are more likely, these group are less likely. This is how much this group are going to do. And that gives us a view of well, if our goal's 50, the pipeline's telling us, well, actually it's more like 10, these kind of things. How do you get a view on the reality versus the target as time goes on?
That's tough. I think where you've got to be careful is for reality of what they can really give. I mean, don't set it too high. And early on when I started this, I did that. Oh, I think they can give you 5 million. Well, then they come in and say, well, we'll give you 1 million. It's it's kind of devastating. So you almost set your target a little bit. To me now, what I do is I set my target a little bit lower so I can, okay, here's all these. Now, if I go in and they, instead of asking for 5 and they give me 1, I ask for 1 and they say, you know what, we like this, we'll give you 5. Hey, that's a win. So you got to be careful on that. Early on in my career, I think I was too ambitious. Now I'm a little bit more reality thinking where people are at, what their businesses are making, what's happening in the market for them. I mean, inflation's going right now. You got to be careful with that and things like that. So not being too aggressive, but yet being aggressive enough. That's the difficult portion of it. I mean, there's been times I've gone in, I've asked for something, and I'm like, my gosh, if I would have asked for double that, would they have given it to me? So it's a hard, very hard way to do that kind of stuff.
It's the sort of thing in general. It's better for everyone, whether it be the students or faculty or board, they're the other donors, to see a campaign that's you targeted 20, you hit 30 than the other way around. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show that a fear of missing out can be really effective, because if you come into the last few weeks of the campaign and you've already hit your target or you're close, with 10% below, that can really drive interest. Whereas if there's a big gap, I think any prospective donors feel, well, hey, my 1 million's not going to help really because the gap's so big to the target. So it's an interesting psychology point, really. And yeah, you're right. We particularly in our earlier stages, we were way too optimistic about how much a particular person could invest. And so we're much more direct. And I don't know if it's translating into your world, but we always ask investors in the first call, what's your typical check size? Like how much you typically invest in a company? Who have you invested in recently, to get a feel for how serious they are as an investor, whether this is an idea or something they do regularly. Yeah. And then we ask them various things like, how big are these companies that you invest in, and check that what they have invested in recently is similar to us, just to see that we're not disconnected and have different kind of expectations.
Yeah, Dave, and we're the same way. I mean, when we go in, if we're looking at a foundation, we do our research. What is their average gift? What have they given in the past? If it's infrastructure dollars, do they give a little bit more comparable to scholarship dollars or equipment, stuff like that? So we have a lot of that research is done during that research phase. So we kind of know when I was a younger president, didn't do it. I didn't do that research probably the way I needed to do. And I've learned a lot of lessons over the years, but knowing what they've done in the past, what their average gift is, I think is important.
Exactly. And we don't use Salesforce or anything like that. We do for meeting universities, but for the fundraising side, we just have a little spreadsheet. It's quicker, simpler.
That's what I used to. I don't use Salesforce. I got sheets over here and a file folder where I'm at.
Totally. And it's always got to do with what's going to be easiest and quickest to enact things. And you mentioned before another really interesting point. So if the fundraise doesn't go to plan, what does that mean? And have you ever seen a situation in your career where a college has had a funding deficit, and maybe partly due to a fundraising not going to plan? And you obviously mentioned earlier that it's a difficult situation in terms of tax or the state providing more funding. So what happens if one of these campaigns is missed the target by a significant way? Well, and what do you do about it?
Normally when you go into that, that, hey, if I don't get to the right amount, what through state general aid or through our support or can I utilize to help kind of bridge that gap? So I've always been able to look at that a little bit. One of the things that, it's definitely in the state of Iowa, and I think other states are the same way, is, sometimes if I can say right now, and it's 55 million, I've got 20 million out there, you can go to your taxpayer, say, hey, will you vote or approve a general obligation bond for me that will be paid over a 20-year. So, tying those two together, I think are very important. But normally we kind of know where we're at, what we have, how we can do this. If we don't hit target, to continue to move forward. And sometimes people, what I call value engineering, may not be as big of a project, or maybe scale it down just a little bit when it gets to it. Not tons. Knock on wood, I've not ran into that yet as my stuff or what I've done. But I've heard about it. I mean, presidents have, and there's been times that they can't get to it and they're done. But normally you've got that kind of that gift, that first donor that you can do. And sometimes you can go back to those donors who say, I'll give you $1 million, go out and see what you can do. So sometimes we even set it up knowing that, hey, go out, they're going to give me $1 million, but come back to me at the end. Let me see what you've done ahead of time. And a lot of times I'll give you a little bit more, when it comes to. So you kind of set that up for that. Hey, I missed my target by 5 million. And you go to three other donors or foundations, and they'll say, okay, we'll up ours and we'll cover that 5 million. So I've seen that happen too.
Yeah, really interesting point there, and how to raise a bit more at the last minute, because you don't have time to go meet new people. That takes, months from meeting someone to getting donate. But you've got your existing donors. Maybe they committed to this campaign, maybe they committed to the last one, and they may be able to help out the last minute. And then the down scoping of whatever the activity or initiative was, so it fits in with budget. Exact same in our world. We always have a plan B for if the fundraising doesn't come in. We're going to grow a bit slower, or build this product a little slower, or not build this second product this year, and things like this, of course. And Dan, so just to wrap up, again, if I was a new college president, this is my first campaign, what are your top tips for me, just to summarize?
Number one is get your research done first. Get the data to support why you're out there asking you. That's the most critical piece. You talked about it, having the right presentation, knowing what to go in. It can't be a canned presentation. Everybody's a little bit different. But the flyer itself of what the job market looks like, the outlook's coming, stuff like that, that can be canned, but the presentation itself. So that's number one. Have that data before ever going out to start fundraising. Because if you go out without that, it's transparency. What am I doing? What am I trying to get to? Put that clear transparency out there. Lean on your staff. You've got great staffs. I think that's the most important thing, is you can't do it yourself. You've got to lean on your staff to help get the word out there, putting some of that stuff together. If I tried to do a campaign all by myself, I would burn myself out. So, lean on your staff there, and go out and be very honest, and work with people, and be ready for the no's. The no is going to happen. How you respond to the no down the road, even with that donor, plays. I mean, if you're upset, they're never going to give to you. If hey, I understand you're at a period of time. Maybe I'll come back some other day and hit that donor. So those are the key portions out there.
And it's funny because, like, coming into this conversation with you, I knew there'd be a lot of similarity with tech and education, but actually I'd say pretty much exactly the same. We also covered on the point around qualifying, and I think particularly young business owners, they bark up the wrong tree. That they think someone's an investor, or they think this is a good place to find investors, but really they've disconnected, whether that be because the investor invests only in much bigger companies, or invest in a different sector, or they don't invest at all and they just have the word investor on their LinkedIn, but they don't actually, there's no evidence they ever have before or will in the future. So I think the key for a young business owner is always be direct, ask, get some evidence of what they've done before, and be realistic. Like, a venture capital fund is likely not going to fund a company that is pre-revenue anymore. There's a little bit of that in, Silicon Valley, but mostly these days, if you're starting out a new business, you're going to be raising from angels. The best way to find them is angel networks and companies that have raised from angels before. So just a bit of advice. That's sort of the one-liner I probably have said 100 times to other entrepreneurs, and they always seem to bark up the wrong tree. But yeah, well, really appreciate your time today, Dan. Anyone that's listening to this, obviously do feel free to reach out to Dan or I if you are doing your own fundraising campaign. Any feedback is, of course, welcome, and we'll see you at the next episode.